This episode of Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation is brought to you in part by Clay Boykin Life and Business Coaching, because we all get stuck at times. For more information, visit clayboykin.com. By Janelli Bean, for fun and engaging children's books with cute and colorful characters. For more information, visit janellibean.com. And by Wise Owl Organizing, simply set up for you. Organizing consulting and clarity coaching, virtual or in person. For more information, visit wiseowlorganizing.com.
Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and welcome to part 2 of my reasonably spontaneous conversation with writer, tech historian, and futurist Benj Edwards. We ended the last RSC agreeing that we live in interesting times, to put it mildly. Here is how we picked up that conversation. Can you take me over let's say the past 10 years, or just give me some span of time, when you have changed your mind about something that you thought was for sure, and you went, oh, that's not true. And then your own learning, take me through that process of when Benj Edwards goes through oh, wow, that's different than I thought it was.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it does play into what we were just talking about, which is that I think one of the biggest switches in my brain was maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I don't know exactly when I had always thought of technology as an unstoppable force for good, basically, like as almost like an ideological built-in thing, because my dad was an engineer, electronics engineer, and he built things that helped people. And I grew up with technology that was created with a real San Francisco and Silicon Valley hippie ideology of helping others and charity and sharing, and making money, but helping people along the way. And then with the rise of social media, I started to see, well, wait a minute, this can go too far. It can start being destructive with like Facebook and maximizing for agitation and arousal of like anger and those emotions. They make profit on people's anger and agitation and engagement, and that's their product, is they're selling agitation. So, and they've become extremely wealthy and powerful doing that. Those companies like Facebook, up until recently anyway, because Meta's not doing that great right now. They still are doing great, but their trajectory is no longer, it doesn't look like this anymore. But I had it was very disillusioning for me. I remember thinking about, I don't remember what particular event it was or anything. You could probably trace it back on Twitter when I first said something negative about social media or something. But I was very heartbroken about the fact that I could no longer say that computer technology helped the world. It was starting to hurt the world, starting to disrupt governments and disrupt our social systems. And that was really hard. It's really sad because I grew up with the rah, this cool stuff is cool. This is good for everybody. It's fun. It's nice and everything. And then suddenly, well, all that stuff I had been championing, personal computer, which was always supposed to be great, has actually led to something that's not always great. So,
we have given,
yeah.
all right, so we have given this, we've seen this in Star Trek, right? When they give technology to a civilization that is not quite ready for it, and so we see that, or we see that in some others. So we're at a point. Are we ready for this technology? Are we ready? We've been given this gift. Are we mature enough as a species in our intellect and consciousness to handle it? Now, I know you can't answer that question, but what
Yeah.
is your inkling and thoughts about that?
I think that we have always been disrupted by technology. It's been like, I have this theory I've been working on for many years that is, I've always wanted to write about, but I never really got to it, about consensus and how it's reliant. Consensus is reliant on like low bandwidth systems, basically. So the less information you have about other people, the more likely you are to think that they agree with you, because everyone thinks that they think like you do. Kind of, you would assume, okay, so I know nothing about the world. I'm the sample size of one here. They're probably all like me. They probably do what I do, think what I think, right? But then suddenly you learn about your neighbor and they're like, well, they don't think like me. They do some slightly different stuff, but hey, we live in this area and we're kind of the same. I bet everybody's like this neighborhood, you know? And then it goes out to the city. Mass communication is invented. We have, everybody in the city, we got a newspaper, we got horses and carts and stuff, horses and carts that tell us things from little cities. And they're kind of, well, maybe they're not like us. And in fact, they don't worship the same variety of, God. So let's kill them. And so that was technology, breaking things apart. And there's a lot of speculation. This is something I made up, but I think other people agree that the printing press was probably a cause for the Protestant Reformation and the wars that happened, because Protestantism couldn't have happened without a printed Bible that was mass produced, that people could say, hey, that's not the rules, it's written right here, before they had to believe in the church. So then people could change that and have their own version, and then it split up. Like every time there's a communications revolution, we break up into smaller groups. So I think that's happened before with radio, television, telegraph, mail, Pony Express, internet, everything has caused some sort of agitation that sort of like breaks us apart into smaller units of consensus. And I feel like we're at a point where we're really close to not being able to maintain really large nations anymore that have the same ideology, because they're just too big, with too many micro cultures that don't agree with each other. And we started with a federation of states that was supposed to be like, okay, we have our state culture here and this state culture, and we just sort of get along when we need to do like common defense and interstate trade. But over time, the central government has gotten so strong that it just doesn't fit everybody anymore. And I'm worried about that with our country, for example. And I think it's from technology. We weren't ready. We were never ready for any of these things that happened. But when is anybody ready for anything? The thing is biology, evolution, and things like that. Organisms die all the time and they suffer, and you only see that when you step back. Nobody wants to be the fish that gets eaten by the bigger fish. But in the scheme of things, that's happening all the time. And we've been, as humans, have lived through all these tumultuous periods of time caused by the almighty dollar of productivity, demanding more output, and along the way, and and the communications revolutions in between. And so I feel like, no, we're not ready. The difference is that, yes, those disruptions will happen faster than ever before because of this acceleration. And yeah, I mean, I think we're going to live through some really difficult times. The only hope I'd say is, like, maybe if everyone really makes their own micro reality, eventually maybe they could just live in that bubble and be happy there and not have to fight with other people. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, I think of this, Benj, and because this is it's such a fascinating thought, because I think of, okay, what is this being that is a human being? And because I've met so many people, and I've really felt like that I've looked into the soul of the human being, and there is something positive there. There is something constructive, collaborative, tribal, communicative. This is what I find is that when we get into, I have found is that, and again, you have to understand, factor in that I'm a blooming optimist. So, make sure that you have that, is that I believe that humans actually that we're going to get through this, that there is going to be that need to collaborate, because I've always found that dysfunctional behavior always comes out of fear. It never comes out that human beings are naturally. I look at the kids. You look at a kid in the grocery store and you look at it and you go, my God, I know the world's going to be okay when you see that these bright lights, it's like we get trained out of that, but I believe it's baked into the human DNA.
Here's what, yeah, I agree with you in general. Humans will persevere and survive, but our systems will change, and they've always changed. Like our governments will change. We may be at the twilight of America as a union of 50 states. I mean, that's just something, it can't last forever. And so that's what's scary to a lot of people. They say the world is ending, but it's not really the world. It's just our government system or our cultural systems that are changing. And the status quo is being destroyed. Because like even at my age, I'm 41, I grew up in the 80s with a certain type of media reality of things were that way, and they're just not that way anymore. So my world is already broken and destroyed by technology. And that's probably happened with every single generation through history going back.
But the fact is that you were there when it happened.
Yeah.
You were in the room when it happened, and actually during the process when it happened, and documenting history as it happens.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I wrote that down. I think when I started my blog in 2005, I said something like, we are in the middle of the most important transition in human history since whatever, like the invention of fire or something. Even in 2005, I was thinking that because of, what I read in Ray Kurzweil and what I was thinking about the information, the computer as becoming from a separate object and box, something that's integrated first into our society and our economy, and then eventually into ourselves. And so we're already partly there with the smartphone, like we talked about, and just augmenting us and our intelligence and our productivity. And I wanted to say, like, I realized I'm sort of part of the last generation that grew up without the internet when they were kids. I started using the internet maybe a few years early, like 94 or something. But I still went to libraries and looked up books with card catalogs. For example, we had paper maps, we got lost. There were a lot of things that I still knew. But so the weird thing is that, so I look at my kids and I look at me, and I have more in common with my parents' generation now, growing up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, than my kids' generation, like in terms of the technology and the tools we use, which is something I never expected. I thought it was like, wow, who could, the 80s and then the 50s, they're so different. But now it's like, you look back, they had the same thing. They had a telephone, they rode their bikes around. The parents didn't know where they were. They could do anything they wanted. I was like that as a kid, but my kids are not. Everyone knows where they are. Everyone's connected all the time. And there's corporations conspiring to track your every move and understand everything you ever do in your whole life so they can make money on it, which is a whole different set of criteria than when I was a kid, where they were still pretending to do good things, at least while making money. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you as a father, very quickly, because I have about 1,000 more hours of questions, but do you feel that I talked to a librarian and read about a librarian who talked about that we have digital immigrants and digital natives, and that the digital natives, they were actually wired differently, that the brain has a different wiring than those of us who have to go from linear to digital and make that translation as if I was had to make the translation in language all the time, that there's a difference in it. Does that hold any intrigue to you?
Yeah, I think that's probably correct. There's, from my knowledge of science and neurology, there is a period of time when babies learn very rapidly and their brain is developing, and that period of time, what you feed it, what you feed them is going to determine a lot of things about them. You know I talked about genetics earlier. There's a big component of that, but there's also the feeding during that period of how much what language you teach them, what skills you teach them, how much you love them and care for them, how much they feel fear and things like that, and how quickly they get information could be one of those things. So my kids grew up with, I guess they had iPads for playing games. Their attention span is microscopic, but it's all parents of my generation now. It was too hard to resist letting their kids occupy themselves with this amazing rectangle.
Exactly. And how that, well, when you say attention span is microscopic, could they within that microscopic time observe and learn faster than we could in a much larger time span, that they were just truncating it out that they can get it? And or is it the same? Is attention span something that is immutable?
I think it's possible. I've seen like the speed of other, just generally, this is a weird different thing, but the speed of people's brains seems to be different. And sometimes it's based on where you live, like cultures. Like in the South, people seem to think kind of slower. They talk slower, they act slower. In the North, for example, they seem to act faster. And I honestly, people could say, oh, that's just how they talk and stuff. But in my experience, you can overwhelm people down here really quickly if you talk way too fast. So I'm from the South, but I have to slow down and really spell things out for some people here. And in the North, then they're like a machine gun. So that is probably like a cultural thing that was taught to them when they were kids by their parents, and it's passed down. I believe you could probably take someone from the South and raise them in a Northern family, and they could think that fast, and vice versa. It's like how they were exposed to that culture around them, because we are all like neurological, like networks and machines that like absorb. We're training kids when they're little, like we train AI now. Sure, it's different on the details and everything, but I think it's a pretty good metaphor. I've learned a lot about myself too, just thinking about how AI works these days. Just
like what?
Well, like how I think and why I think certain things in those ways, and it seems to be like, yes, it is like training a neural network, like and your memory, what you reinforce sticks with you, and what you don't reinforce you lose, but it fades. It's not a on or off thing. And those neural networks work a lot in the same way, where they have a general idea of something, and the stronger you train it on an idea, like a certain set, they call it overfitting. If you train it too much on one thing, it can only spit out one thing, kind of, one type of thing. You want it to be sort of halfway between, be accurate enough to produce what you want, but a less amount of accuracy enough to produce novel output that's interesting. And so we're probably somewhere in between there too, with our brains. Like we're very fuzzy knowledge, like of and I also feel like I see now like the layers of our brains. Like I think science supports the ideas that different parts of our brains, they have different functions, and they sort of act semi-independently and then sort of together. And a thought can bubble up from some other part of your brain into your consciousness. That part was always thinking about what's going on. It might not have been part of your internal dialogue the whole time, like the language part of your brain, but it was still there and thinking, and like these layers of thought. And it seems like the neural network, a lot of people say, obviously it's not exactly like the human brain. It's inspired by it, these neural networks that people are using, but it seems like a pretty good metaphor to me. Like I'm sure there's something more accurate will be invented eventually that's even closer to it, but for right now it seems to jibe with my experience as a human being, which is crazy.
Do you come up against your own conscious and unconscious biases? When they come up, I mean, do you get a chance to recognize them and go, whoa, what is that really about?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't know. I grew up with, I guess cultural values that were created mostly either by my parents or through television.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of, when new cultural ideas come around, uh, like, I don't know, what's a good example? I don't know, like there's been a lot of growth involved with recognizing um, like different, like the whole gender conversation right now, for example,
Mhm.
is something that was very alien to me and probably a lot of people in my generation, because we didn't grow up with that knowledge put into us. That was not part of our training. That there's a spectrum of genders, for example, and so there's a new idea here that says there's a spectrum of genders, and so you can easily fall back. I believe there's a spectrum of genders. I understand that. But part of that brain that was trained in 1982 or whatever still can come back and say, "What? This is kind of weird." But even if it's wrong, you catch yourself and you say, "Well, there is new information, and time to like re-examine." And I think that also supports the layers of the brain where there's parts of you that are, doing different things all at the same time. And I believe that you can have cognitive dissonance where you believe two opposing ideas because you never stop to reconcile them completely. Um, so,
I had that happen to me when I grew up in the South, and I mean, actually, I'm 74, so I grew up during the Jim Crow era. I got a
uh,
chance to see separate but equal, to be able to see it from the white side, to see, and I remember, because we were culturally liberal, and I thought I had really that I was really had reconciled everything between the races, the understanding that, and then I'm watching TV and I watch Captain Kirk kiss Uhura.
mhm.
And I had a visceral, physical reaction to that. Mentally, I was already there. I'd already dealt with it, but I had no idea that I had internal unconscious biases that I needed to deal with about the racial, about racial awareness that was there. And so they come up and they bite me.
Yeah, I I understand that completely. Having grown up in the South, it's very relatively conservative. You know, Interracial relationships were taboo even when I was a kid, and it doesn't bother me at all today or anything. But I understand that sort of, because it was just part of the culture you breathe. And I thought I was extremely liberal too. It turns out there's always someone more liberal than you are. Um, and I look more like a centrist now. The I tell my Like when I meet people out in the country here, they're very conservative. I'm Someone tried to ask me what my political views are. I said, well, if I were in the country, you'd think I was liberal. If I'm in the city, you'd think I was conservative. Somewhere between there, kind of like, I don't know if that makes any sense. But yeah, I try to be moderate. Um, but for human rights and decency, obviously too. And so yeah, I understand.
I love the idea of decency, because
Yeah.
that to me is what is one of the things that is moving, and I believe that decency could be our savior. The idea that treating one another decently, seeing, because when I look out at Elon Musk, and the way, I do not see a lot of decency in the way he is treating that organization.
Mhm. Yeah.
That there is a decency, or when I look at some of the political contests, the idea of decency, how do we value that, and to see, is it an important commodity and an important part of it? This is one of the reasons why I believe that we are over masculine and under feminine. We need more women in, because this is going to help to increase the decency index.
Yeah. uh, Decency right now is in short supply, obviously, because our society right now is running on that agitation machine. Like our media is completely governed by algorithms, even if they don't realize it. Even then, the traditional news media is driven by what happens in the social media space. So decency doesn't get a lot of clicks, it doesn't get a lot of engagement, and so it's not popular at this moment. But in that, the theory I was telling you about, consensus, looking back at history, yes, I lined up some revolutions with things like the Civil War was actually precipitated a lot by newspapers and the telegraph. But we're not still at Civil War. Something happened to make that stop. And, and I think that we will have periods of unrest, but what happens, I think, is we form into new cultural groups that are decent within themselves and maybe indecent to other groups. But that's sort of like we're at a stage of breaking apart the stasis that happened after World War II. The 1950s type of there could never be another Eisenhower, for example. He was very moderate type of Republican guy. He was very liberal by today's standards. But he was someone who could bring the country together and everyone respects him, even if they're not in the same party, that kind of thing. I feel like we are, I'm rambling now, tangential, that, cultural groups have to have their own rules to enforce their membership, basically to survive. And we're seeing a lot of other groups' rules, and they're trying to impose their rules on each other and stuff. And what we need is just a sorting out of these types of groups again, and there can be a peace. The funny thing is, I think that people were upset about Truth Social or Parler or something existing, like a conservative Twitter. I think that's a really good thing, because if they can live in their group and the liberals can live in their group, this is the natural sorting. We tried to push everybody together in the boat. You take one random person all over the world, put them in the same boat and make them live together, they're going to fight because they don't share anything in common. And that's sort of what social media did. It threw everybody on Earth into the same boat. And we are now, I think it's going to have to separate again. We're like, okay, we don't get along. You guys hang out over there, talk your stuff. We'll hang out over here, talk our stuff, and that's okay. We meet in the middle when we need to trade and buy and sell things and, have defense and stuff. And I wish that could happen. I'm hoping that's some kind of new equilibrium will exist. But the decency will only happen within those bubbles. I don't think it will happen between them. And this question is, can our political system survive this kind of upheaval that has never faced these kind of challenges before, especially if people start creating their own alternative realities that are believed by millions of people? I have no idea, so.
Yeah, it is a fact. Listen, thank you so much, Benj. I can only ask that in the future, when we get a chance, when there have been some very interesting events and advances, that you might come and share with me again. Share
sure
with us some of the opportunities.
Yeah, that would be great. It's been really fun. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, listen, thanks, Benj, and we'll go ahead and post this up, and we'll see everybody. Thank you for this wonderful time and your attention for watching Benj and me talk about the future, and so much I'm learning. And so we'll see everybody next time.
Bye-bye.
And scene, I'll cut it right there. Now, I want to ask one thing, just evolutionarily. I have this intuition that AI is our way of creating the next evolutionary species. There's an evolutionary imperative that however we went to Homo habilis, got into the, whatever the chimpanzees and the bonobos had that imperative to move to the next one. This is our opportunity to create the next level of species that is higher than us, that we might not even fully recognize as alive, because we don't have the consciousness ability to be able to do it, like a bonobo might not have the consciousness ability to understand my something that I care about.
I think you're right, something like that. I think it even goes bigger than that. I had a thought recently where the universe sort of has these layers of physics chemistry, biology, and I think the next layer is information on top of that. So everything was built on the complexity of what came before, and we are creating the information layer right now that runs on top of biology and runs above it, and I think our ultimate destiny is probably to manipulate matter as if it were information. And I think that's, if you just see technology going forever, if we continue on our path, I mean, it seems inevitable that we'll figure out how to do that, mess with the rules of the universe and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know if we'll be human, on that way, but
Who knows?
some intelligent creature will be doing it,
This episode of Reasonably Spontaneous Conversations has been brought to you in part by In Search of the New Compassionate Male. For more information, go to newcompassionatemale.com.